Hello, Florida. This is Joe Mullins of the Live Work Shop Play Show. And good morning in some areas, good afternoon in some areas. And what a beautiful weekend it is here in the most beautiful area in the most beautiful state in the country. And I've got a very special guest with me today. I've got Robert Mazur with me. And Robert Mazur is the author and producer of the movie Infiltrator. And Robert, you are talking a little bit about the IRS. There is so much talk about all the IRS agents that have been hired lately and been brought in. And me being a county commissioner and being a very conservative Republican, I have come out and had many people reach out to me and say it's not true, that Biden isn't doing that there is no ploy with the IRS to do anything. And then a few days later, all of a sudden, the administration used the FBI to go in and raid Mar-a-Lago, and everybody's going, wait a minute, maybe there's some truth to this. Maybe we are having our government weaponized against us. Tell us a little bit about you, your history, and then what your thoughts on some of these comments are.
Sure. Well, I was a federal agent for 27 years, and my first 11 years of that was as a special agent with the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. And from there, I moved on to the U.S. Customs Office of Enforcement, which is now Homeland Security Investigations, and then on to the Drug Enforcement Administration. And I actually worked undercover as an agent in all three of those agencies. After retiring, I ran an investigative agency for 15 years that provided services globally to law firms and major corporations. And once my book, The Infiltrator, which was a New York Times bestseller, was converted into a film starring Bryan Cranston, who played me. I was too involved in filmmaking to continue working in the investigative field, and I have since worked on that, as well as a new book that just came out called The Betrayal, which is a nonfiction book that's about another 2.5-year undercover assignment that I did. When I worked undercover, I infiltrated the Colombian cartels as a money launderer. And I dealt with leaders of the Medellin cartel and laundered funds for the likes of Pablo Escobar. So it was a little bit of a different type of an assignment, and it was in deep cover. But there are many, many agents, criminal investigators in the United States that provide that type of service in an effort to try to bring some of the biggest criminals on the planet behind bars. So
you know, I hear a lot about the drug deals and stuff, and so many people say the money laundering is what gets most drug dealers. They don't get arrested for the drugs. They go to jail for long periods of time for money laundering. And some of these names are some of the biggest names in the industry that we have heard about. So you have a lot of experience working with the IRS and doing some things. This is a whole deep level. I mean, this is pretty serious up here.
Yeah, I think it is. I, too, am a conservative Republican, but I can tell you that I have a different view about the Inflation Reduction Act and the plan to provide the IRS over 10 years with $78 billion. And there's something that we need to recognize that's happened over the last 10 years, or actually since 2010, and that is that the budget of the IRS has been cut 20% during that time frame, and the enforcement budget, which would pay for revenue agents and special agents, criminal investigators, who would go after the biggest tax cheats in the United States, has been cut 31%. So when you look at the history of it, you know, when I started way back when, you know, it's hard to imagine, but in 1971, I started with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. At that time, we had 2,500 special agents, and there were roughly 400,000 millionaires in the country. Fast forward to 2010, you have 2,900 IRS special agents. That's 400 more than they had about 3 decades before, and 3.1 million millionaires. Now come to 2020, 10 years later, during that 10 years, a complete undermining of the budget of the IRS. In 2020, we have 20.27 million heirs in the United States, plus 788 billionaires, and we only have 2,200 IRS special agents. So you can take a look at the statistics of their criminal prosecutions, and you can see that from 2010, when there were 2,184 that year, to 2021, about half that, actually 44% of that. Clearly, due to the lack of resources, we don't see criminal prosecutions of major tax evaders. And what does that mean? That means that we don't have on our front pages of our papers every now and then a story about a fat cat who wound up trying to evade income taxes and got caught. And by putting that kind of information out there, it promotes voluntary compliance. And I'm not talking about going after the average Joe, but I do believe we need to go after very, very wealthy Americans who, and this is another thing that America needs to take a very close look at. In the last 10 years, there's been 8 international banks that have admitted to criminal conspiracies with literally tens of thousands of extremely wealthy U.S. citizens by providing them with offshore corporations, nominee directors and officers, encrypted computers when they come to the U.S. to show them their bank account records so they don't have to get things through the mail that might be caught by customs. They have people delivering cash and picking up cash from them. And they even have bankers, and this was in one of the major Swiss bank cases, they deliver burner phones to the wealthy so that they don't have to use their home or business phones, and there's not going to be a record of their communication with the Swiss bank. This is a conspiracy that's been going on for decades, and you can't do that with an under-resourced staff. And this $78 billion that comes over 10 years is in effect going to enable the IRS to get over the 10 years 20,000 more employees, because more than half of them will be retiring in the next 5 years. So we have to be able to take into account attrition and the under budget situations that we have. If you've ever tried to talk to IRS taxpayer assistants and ask a tax question, as I have, you probably have gotten the same thing I have, a recording. I can't get through to anybody because they just don't have the staff.
So in the Infiltrator, you took down what, the seventh largest bank, I believe at the time? So
seventh largest privately held bank. Yep.
So if that were to happen in the U.S., is there a possibility that you could take down one of the largest banks in the U.S., and how would that affect the economy if you did?
Well, we almost did that back in, I think it was around 2009, when Wachovia Bank got caught with their involvement committing criminal offenses in the laundering of literally, I think it was, they proved about 160 million, but there was certainly much, much more money involved for the Mexican and Colombian cartels. And in that instance, rather than anybody going to jail, the Wachovia Bank was allowed to pay a fine. I think they paid $160 million, and they were sold to Wells Fargo. And so the asset moved on.
So you just dress it up in a different outfit kind of thing and move it on.
Yeah, a slap on the wrist, pay a fine.
Didn't they, Wells Fargo got in a little trouble. So, my concern with all these billionaires and these things, those guys literally have enough money to hush people up, to change the system. And I talk about politics all the time. The people in office making the laws, making the decisions are ran by a select small few. And those laws, even though they may seem perceptually good for the America, they really are catered to a certain group. And when they start using things like same-sex marriage and gender equality and all that, it's really, to me, a smokescreen to make you look one way while they're doing stuff on the other. I mean, let's face it, these guys in office are being put there by people with power and money, and they're pushing to make more power and money. They really don't care about all these issues that are coming out that people are seeing spin around. And
the thing that troubles me is that this undermining of the IRS's budget happened from 2010 to 2020, and unfortunately, most of the people who led that were in my party. They were Republicans, and I'm not proud of that at all. But the bottom line is that I agree with you. Sometimes it really doesn't matter what side of the aisle people are on. There's an agenda that's going on that we don't get to see normally surface. Corruption is an awful thing that exists throughout the world, and unfortunately, life's a bell curve. So for us to think that doesn't happen in the United States would be very naive. It happens in every country on this planet.
So for your second book, The Betrayal, did you go undercover for that with cartels as well? Was that like undercover with foreign or domestic? Because I'm wondering what it's like to be undercover in the IRS in the U.S.
Well, in The Betrayal, I was with the Drug Enforcement Administration at the time, and I was through informants and a lot of work that we did beforehand, I was able to infiltrate the Cali cartel and certain members of the Panamanian underworld who were involved in laundering drug proceeds. Unfortunately, as we've been talking about corruption, I nearly got killed because one of my colleagues was on the take, unbeknownst to us, and sold my identity out to the leaders of the Cali cartel. And there were a few occasions on which I was almost kidnapped and killed. And so, unfortunately, that's life. That's a reality of life in just about every country. Just look at it. In this year, we extradited from Honduras the president of Honduras, who now faces the rest of his life in jail here. His brother's already in jail for the rest of his life and convicted, as well as a room full of senators from Honduras who sold their entire country out to the Mexican and Colombian cartels and enabled it to be used as a gate into the Americas for cocaine, for fentanyl, and for all types of illegal drugs. There are a lot of things that are going on in the Americas here that are very concerning, but the least of which I think should be our concern about the $78 billion that I really do believe over 10 years is desperately needed in order to be able to have an effective IRS that's going to take the thumb off the scale of the fat cats in the tax world. Because unfortunately, when billionaires don't pay taxes, that puts us into either deficits or other ways in which we have to generate that money. And it falls on our shoulders, the people who are willing to and pay their fair share of taxes. And that's just not fair.
Now, Robert, I got a question for you. Lately, we've heard a lot about 78,000 IRS agents agents being hired. Is this true? What is your take on that? What are they needed for? Some people are saying they're more focused on the general public. They're not there to go after the billionaires. What is your take on that? And do we need that if that is happening?
Okay, first of all, it's not a true statement to say, and the number they're throwing around is 87,000 employees. Those 87,000 employees, you have to take into consideration attrition. And basically what it's going to do is over a period of time, it will enable the IRS to have roughly about 20,000 more employees than they currently have, which would bring them to where they were back in 2010, when there were far less multimillionaires who were out there that were playing the tax evasion game. So that's number one. It's not truthful to say to the American public that there's going to be 87,000 employees. And for anyone to say that they're going to use those resources, and I've seen this quote, and it's a quote from Ted Cruz, Senator Cruz, that they're going to be going after people who make $75,000 or less. How much water can you get out of a dry sponge? There is no way that the IRS is going to go after, or there's going to be a plan to go after people who are making only $75,000 a year only. There's some Americans who think that that's not just an only, but $75,000 a year. That's not where this is going to wind up being focused upon. And the IRS hasn't even come up with an official game plan to follow out what's been said to be the general plan of going after the fat cats, because it wasn't until just now that the Inflation Reduction Act got passed. So it's impossible to say that this is a plan that has been hatched to try to go after the average Joe. It really troubles me a lot that people have a tendency to say those types of things. And while we're at it, Senator Cruz also said he believes that they should abolish the IRS. Well, I guess maybe that's because his thinking is we should pay a flat tax. But you know what? A flat tax based upon zero income reported is zero. And if the fat cats continue to use the offshore corporations, the lawyers, and the other resources they have that nobody else has, a flat tax isn't going to make any difference, because you've got to get people to report honestly what their amount of their taxable income is. And it's just not happening. One quick thing. I was actually, and am actually, along with two other individuals, a whistleblower who provided information to the IRS about a U.S. citizen, happens to be an attorney, who evaded income tax on at least $50 million. I and two other individuals provided boxes about this individual's purchases of villas in Europe, gold bullion, while still thumbing his nose and saying to everybody and anybody who listened to him, "I'll never pay taxes to the IRS." We provided that information in 2016. Do you know that till today, nearly 7 years later, we've gotten no notice from the IRS that they've ever done anything that's resulted in any collection of taxes from that individual? They don't have the resources to work on a lot of this stuff. This one's almost unexplainable because it was given to them on a silver platter.
So my question is, when that does happen, what is your job in that? Are you the one that they bring into court to help prove these things? Do you work with the prosecutors to go after them when there is the opportunity to?
No, the agents that are assigned to the IRS are the ones who have to do that. They're sworn officers, active employees of the U.S. government. We simply provide them with a roadmap of exactly where everything is located and what, in our view, is clear evidence of income tax evasion, not avoidance, but evasion of more than $50 million of taxable income. And that gets provided to them and to the Department of Justice for them to hopefully eventually do the right thing. But that hasn't been done in that particular case. And I've heard from, there are many law firms in the United States that specialize in handling what's called whistleblower cases. Because under the law, in many different cases where you have defense contracting fraud, where you have IRS fraud, where you have money laundering, people who are whistleblowers and provide very significant information can actually be awarded as much as 25% of what the government couldn't otherwise have collected. So there's become this cottage industry of law firms that go after those types of cases. And what I've heard repeatedly from the legal community that works in that area is that the story that I've told about the 7-year case, evidence on a silver platter yet to have been acted upon, is not that unusual, because they just don't have enough personnel to get the job done. And they are up against very, very high paid lawyers and accountants who go to battle with the IRS on these types of cases. All the more reason, in my view, for why we need to have adequate resources, in order to get the taxation methods in this country on a fair basis, and to get voluntary compliance going again, where people who have deep pockets don't feel as though they can simply get away with whatever they want to get away with, which is another reason why these types of high-profile cases need to be prosecuted and publicized.
So what do you think they should do? Could they get less agents who do better work, I guess you could say, or would it matter? Or what should they do with all that money if they are getting it? Is there a better way to go about it?
Well, first of all, all, they just got word last week that they're going to be able to get that $78 billion. But again, they're only going to be able to net over a period of 10 years. They're going to net an additional 20-some thousand employees. So they're not going to be hiring 87,000 employees because they're going to lose over the next 5 years half of their workforce. Baby boomer and a little bit before the baby boomer, are winding up leaving. And so it's a matter of sustaining and getting back to where they were. Could they get people to work more efficiently? Hey, there's always room for improvement in management, and you've really got to get down into the weeds on almost a case-by-case basis to see whether or not everybody's doing what they should be doing. But again, life's a bell curve. It's kind of like right now I'm a writer, so there's a lot of pretty good writers in the middle. There's excellent ones on one side, and there's pretty bad ones on the other. And I think you could say the same thing for government employees.
Robert, is there hope that we'll get this stuff worked out? And I agree with you. Both sides, both parties have so many bad characters and players in it. And perceptionally, they're saying what the public would want to hear. But at the end of the day, their actions and the stuff behind the scenes isn't matching up to it. So what is your thoughts of how do we fix it?
Well, first of all, when you say fix this, I think there's a broad array of things for us to take into consideration that some very vocal elected officials have been talking about. This is completely different than the objections that have been raised about some people's perception of the search that occurred at Mar-a-Lago. One thing that does bother me, and that is that, I was in effect a cop for 27 years. I really wanted to be a part of making a difference, and 99.9% of the other law enforcement officers that I got the privilege to work with had that same feeling. And I worked with local law enforcement, city police, county police, state police, highway patrol, all the federal agencies. That is the spirit that is within those who feel the calling to become a law enforcement officer. And it just makes my heart ache when I hear people trying to suggest that there's some very broad-ranged political motives within the FBI or within any of the other agencies. I do not believe, having been there myself, being in the front row and continuing to have contact with many law enforcement officers, I don't believe that's the case. I suffered at the hands of a corrupt law enforcement officer that almost got me killed. And that doesn't cause me to say, well, most of the law enforcement officers are corrupt. I know that's not the case. And I unfortunately wound up almost paying the ultimate price for having been put into the same job with somebody who was on the take. But it seems far too easy for people to get up there and make these broad-ranging, undermining, industry-wide comments about different segments of our country. And I can tell you firsthand, in my view, there is no politicization of the FBI or any of the other agencies that are out there. There may be efforts at times by different people in power to try to put people that they can influence in management positions. But the fact of the matter is the work has to be done by the average citizen who accepts a job, a professional job as a law enforcement officer. And I know that I wouldn't, and I know that 99.9% of the people that I work with, I would not carry out an illegal order. It's just not going to happen. And so I just don't think that it's fair to stamp on the reputation of a lot of police officers. I did a book signing and for the first time, I did a public book signing about 2 weeks ago. And I had a contract on my life after I worked long-term undercover that was issued by the leaders of the Medellin cartel. And so I do take certain security precautions. And there were 4 officers there who were assigned to see that I was safe, along with 7 other people from private security company. And I got to meet and talk with those officers, and they see it on the street. It hurts their hearts as well that for some reason the public seems to be getting this impression that they're not there trying to do the best that they can for the people that they serve, and they really do. So that's a thing that really troubles me.
So I know in your first book, in The Infiltrator, the focus was on how do you solve the drug war, and it was basically having other programs for rehabilitation and those types of efforts. Yeah,
as far as the war on drugs is concerned, look in the mirror and recognize the fact that the formula we're now using is not accomplishing what our goals are. We have not reduced the amount of illegal drugs that are in our country, or the insatiable appetite that our public has for illegal drugs. It's really important that we do what I call cutting off the heads of the snakes. I mean, we really do need to take out the El Chapos and the Pablo Escobars, not because of the fact that there's not going to be 5 more of them trying to get into that seat, but because the Army, when you kill generals, it destabilizes the organization. It creates new command and control, and it slows them down and creates problems. It's no different than if you've got a great football team and you've got the best quarterback that ever played in the world, and unfortunately they get injured, it changes the ability of that team dramatically. So, I think we do need to continue to do that. But I do believe that, as I said in the Infiltrator, and I say further in the Betrayal, we need to focus more on the demand side. We not just on illegal drug education and treatment, which I have a firsthand knowledge of being woeful in comparison to what we really need. I have 2 cousins who died of heroin overdoses, and one who I worked for a month trying to get a bed in a county facility. The beds weren't there. Money wasn't there. But luckily he went into a faith-based program and wound up beating it, and now works with others who are recovering addicts. But more importantly, my mom and dad were born in 1921 and 1923, and they're together up in heaven and with the Lord now. So, but in 21 and 23, education was free through high school. Here we are, fast forward to 2022, and education is free through high school. The world has changed. I do believe that we need to seriously, especially in areas where there are underserved, underprivileged communities. And I could care less the color of one's skin. There are people from all walks of life who are underserved and underprivileged. But if you truly are underserved and underprivileged and not in a position to be able to get an education, your options become dramatically less. And I don't mean necessarily a college education. It could be a trade education. But we should at least add 2 more years onto what we now have in order to try to focus on giving our youth the greatest possible chance they have to become productive citizens, pay taxes, to have children who pay taxes and don't get involved in the drug trade nearly as much as they might otherwise. So yeah, I do believe that that's a part of the equation that needs to be tweaked. And I would much rather spend a state education, a state college. I think it's about on average, about $6,200 a year. I'd rather pay that $6,200 than $48,000 a year for incarceration. To me, that's a good investment. We need to be figuring out how is it that we can reduce the demand for some of these illegal drugs. And there are other things that we can do, but that's a big one for me.
As far as the Betrayal goes, is there any possibility of a movie coming out of this one?
Not just a possibility, it's a reality. At the book signing that I did at the Tampa Theater, it was opened with about a 1-minute video appearance by Bryan Cranston, which is now on social media out there. And he announced the fact that he will be playing me in The Betrayal in a sequel to The Infiltrator. So I'm proud to say that that's going to be, at least according to Bryan, and according to I've already sold the movie rights to Amazon Studios, and they've engaged Bryan and me and Brad Furman, the former director, or the director from The Infiltrator, and some others to work on a screenplay, which is actively being done as we speak. And so hopefully, this is such a slow process. We're probably talking 2 years before the public would get to see anything, and that's probably under the best of circumstances. So this is a really, really slow process that really requires a great screenplay. Once you've got the great screenplay, then you can move into filling the positions that you need to fill, and then doing the scouting to figure out where you're going to do the shooting, and then shoot, then go through the editing process, and at the end of that, that's when you start to see trailers come out for the release of the film.
Well, we look forward to that.
This is really some exciting stuff, and just to hear all this and see all this, it's great stuff. So again, the movie Infiltrator, you can go out and rent it.
You should be able to get it on Amazon Prime.
Great information. Robert, we really appreciate you speaking to us about this. It is so much information out there that we hear and see, and to have a professional like you, a guy that's just in the trenches, come out and be a voice, that's very, very big.
And I very much appreciate the opportunity to share time with you and with your listeners. These are important topics, and unfortunately, we get information from so many different directions that are so different that anytime I can, in a small way, contribute to trying to clarify it, I welcome that opportunity.
Robert, thank you for reaching out. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Guys, remember, live, work, shop, play Florida, the greatest county in the greatest country. Let's make sure we take a stand and be strong and keep this place protected and great as it can be. Thank you, and have a great weekend.